bring John McMullen in. He's appearing via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And, of course, Johnny Mac was at the game yesterday. John, I don't know which part of it surprised you the most. The domination, the way they basically cut through the Viking defense, the way the defense stopped Minnesota. How would you, when it's all said and done, you go back and say the Eagles won that game? Why?
Well, real quick, before I get into that, quick public service announcement. Don't punch horses.
That's true, John. Very, very good, John.
But they won the game up front on both sides of the line. Their offensive line, defensive line completely dominated the football game. And, you know, that's been the strength of this team for the entire season. Going all the way back to training camp, we talked about how talented they were on the respective fronts. And that was going to be the strength of this football team. It's borne out. But they were just tremendous yesterday. And Nick Foles was like a hot shooter in the NBA. He was on fire. He was just making throws that he just typically doesn't make. And sometimes you just have that, and you have one of those games, and the Eagles were able to do that on a giant stage in the NFC Championship Game.
Why the Minnesota defense that we heard so much about? And I asked the question last week, you know, a 16-game sample size in which you only play 5 playoff teams in that sample size. I'm not saying the Minnesota defense stinks. I'm not saying that at all. But I wondered if they were as dominating as the numbers suggested, or is that just a byproduct of you have such a small sample size in the NFL, a lot of which are played against not very good teams. Why did the Minnesota defense struggle yesterday?
Well, I think for a number of reasons. I think they were outcoached. I think it starts there. I think the Eagles had the better game plan. They kept them off balance. And then I think you had one of those days where, as I said, Nick Foles was tremendous. And some of the Vikings players had their worst games of the year. All pro-level players. Harrison Smith had his worst game of the year. Anthony Barr had his worst game of the year. And I think if you play this game 99 more times, it probably doesn't happen this way. I really don't. You know, the Eagles are going to win some of those. Minnesota's going to win some of them. Very few are going to be blowouts. This was a strange game. And the minute Patrick Robinson took that interception back to the house, it was over. And a lot of it had to do with the environment. The game was tied 7-7. But the game was over.
Yeah, we talked about a couple of plays, John. The Robinson interception kind of normalized that game. And then I thought the Corey Clement third down where he kind of, you know, that play, they end up scoring on that. Clement gets third down. He breaks a tackle. I thought that play got undervalued. And he made a block on before the Blunt touchdown to get that drive continued. And then the strip sack, they're going down to score and really make this game a shootout.
Probably tie it up.
Yeah, I mean, those plays there, I mean, there was a lot of plays in that game early on that really you could say that was the play of the game or that was the reason why they won.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Chris Long making the play, but I understand what you're saying. And we use Corey as an example as sort of the outlier I think this game was, and the fact that I love the kid. He's improved just dramatically since he got here from OTAs through training camp to where he is now, especially as a receiver. But he's an undrafted free agent, and that tackle is broken on Anthony Barr, who's a 3-time Pro Bowler, one of the best linebackers in football. He just doesn't do that. And on Sunday night, he did it. And it's just one of those things you can't explain. You really can't. Like the third down. If you go back to the regular season, guys, we all talk about Nick Foles' final 5 quarters of the regular season. The Eagles were 1 of 17 on third downs. 1 of 17. They're facing the best third down defense since 1971, 25%. And they go 10 of 14 or whatever it was. It's unbelievable what they were able to do against that defense. And I give all the credit in the world to Doug Pederson. It started early with the RPOs and getting Nick Foles some confidence. He completely had Mike Zimmer off balance the entire game. And when we always talk about great defensive minds, Zimmer's, you're not going to get down far on the list before somebody in this league brings up Zimmer's name. Pederson embarrassed him, and the guy doesn't get enough credit. We've talked about it all the way back to Mike Lombardi's comments. Even before that, when he got hired, and everyone in Philadelphia kind of sighed, and they wanted Adam Gase and Ben McAdoo. This guy has been unbelievable, checking every box from week to week, and you can't give Doug Pederson enough credit.
John McMullen's on with us. Now, John, I was at the game, section 135, watching to see how the line would hold up against that Minnesota defense, and I know it wasn't the Purple People Eaters, but in the week leading up to the game, Doug Pederson called Griffin a wrecker. He was a wrecking ball, basically, a guy that could blow up plays. So how about the job that Big V did in basically eliminating number 97?
Yeah, he did a tremendous job. And I think if you look at really, and I talked about, obviously, the Robinson play, because I think that was the play of the game, but also the strip sack of Derek Barnett, because that's when things, you kind of got the feeling, well, maybe Minnesota will get back in it. They're driving deep into Philadelphia territory. And then it was a bad call from Pat Shurmur, who's had a tremendous year, assistant coach of the year. It's going to be the new head coach of the New York Giants. It's just one of those games where the snowball started running downhill, and it just went right over the Minnesota Vikings. But Vitae specifically held up very well. And, you know, it probably only lasted for about 15 minutes. And then you hate to say this about any professional athlete, especially a group of professional athletes, but the Vikings gave up. They really did. They checked out. They stopped playing.
Yeah.
So
you wonder how much, how the emotional toll took on them. I saw the stat during the week that the last 5 teams that had won on the final play, all of them lost, and most of those games were not close the following week. I mean, most of those games where the team had, that final play, and then they have to go to the next round, I think all 5 of them, other than maybe one, were just lopsided blowouts. You got to imagine the emotional toll of winning that game, and then the pressure of having to try to win to play at home. I get that had to have been on them as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. You're right when you win an emotional game like that. But, I think that's kind of an excuse because the Eagles went through an emotional game too. Remember, their season came down to one play. It wasn't the last play, but it was in, obviously, the final minute, and it was 4th and 2 for the season, Falcons versus the Eagles. That's very emotional
good point.
as well. Now, granted, the Eagles didn't have to travel. They got to stay at home, but they had every opportunity to have another letdown, and that's where we go back to the head coach, who has pushed all the right buttons. And that's part of it. While we talk about X's and O's, which is very important, and Doug was tremendous in that aspect, you also have to talk about managing the personalities in the locker room. And maybe he's been better at that than even X's and O's, because there was every opportunity for them to have a similar letdown, and they had the exact opposite. They were roaring and ready to go.
Managing personalities, the first names that jump out to me, John, are LeGarrette Blount and Jay Ajayi, and the way that he's distributed the ball between those guys, kept LeGarrette Blount happy, been able to do that. And also, if you're going to talk about Doug Pederson's time management and the things he's able to do right before the half, and I hate to keep throwing my dad under the bus, but he turned to me and said, all right, take a knee. I said, take a knee? They got all 3 timeouts in 29 seconds. And then boom, boom, boom. And each time that there was a completion, like Ajayi runs out of bounds for 11 yards, I go, take a knee, huh? And he just shakes his head. And then the Ertz play, hey, I thought the Vikings were supposed to shut down the tight end.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. That's, if you look at Zach Ertz and Alshon Jeffrey, Nick Foles threw to them his top 2 targets 13 times. He completed 13 passes. And a lot of the times, they're playing against Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes, who are all pro players. So it was a bit of an outlier game. The game's been over for what now? Almost a day, and I think Zach Ertz is still running free. They never chipped him at the line. They never, and Zach is a tremendous receiver, but he's not the most physical guy in the world. Let's be honest. So you would think, you might want to beat him up at the line of scrimmage. Vikings never did that. I don't know why. It was just a poor game plan. And other than saying it was just one of those games, I don't think those 2 teams line up today and it's the same game. I don't think the Eagles win it like that. It was just one of those days.
So we talk about Howie Roseman making the right moves, Doug Pederson making the right moves. Are we ignoring Joe Douglas's role in this, or is it just one of those fates of destiny? Because the people that were involved in yesterday's game were all these offseason or midseason pickups that really have gotten the Eagles to this point.
No, Joe's got a big part in that, but I mean, he is what he is, and he runs the day-to-day operations of the scouting department. I mean, that's what football is. When I say Doug Pederson and I talk about this coaching staff, you got to mention Jim Schwartz and Frank Reich and Dave Phipp and everybody down to Justin Peel, the tight ends coach, and Tim Hawk, the safeties coach, but all those guys never get mentioned. I mean, Joe's a very, very important part of what went on this season, but obviously Howie's in charge, so he's going to get most of the credit. He was named Executive of the Year, and similarly, though, if things go badly, he's going to get all the blame. That's part of being in charge.
Some of the plays, because as Pete mentioned yesterday, I mean, legitimately, every guy who had a big play or a hand in it, Foles was a free agent. Blunt scored a touchdown. He was a free agent. Torrey Smith scored a touchdown. He was a free agent. Jeffrey scored 2. He was a free agent. Chris Long with the strip sack. He was a free agent. Patrick Robinson, with the interception return, free agent. Corey Graham had an interception. He was a free agent. I mean, every single guy, it just seemed like they got the right mix, just had the right touch. But in the end, the way Nick Foles played, it's unfathomable to think that he would have that kind of game yesterday. And it seemed that everything he did, stepped up, avoided, made the throw, perfect throw here. I just can't get over the game that kid had. And the fact that Roseman found it important enough to get that veteran backup in here that a lot of teams sometimes overlook and just go with a young guy and try to groom him. That move there is a Super Bowl move. When you go and get a veteran backup quarterback, your mind is on the Super Bowl more so than the future.
Yeah, I mean, here's how well Nick Foles played yesterday. If Carson Wentz is in that game, he's not going to outplay Nick Foles. And I voted for Carson Wentz as the MVP of this league. He's not going to play that well. I can't even – this was like – it wasn't 7 touchdowns, but it was similar to the 7-touchdown game. Everything he did was perfect. Sliding – feeling the rush. And part of it, to be honest, is, it's just, I don't want to use the term luck because he played very, very well, but I don't want to tell people in Philadelphia or tell people in South Jersey to say he's going to play the same way against the Patriots because he's not going to. Nobody in the world can play at that level at a consistent basis.
I like how he set people up for that, though. He said, I might have another game where I'm terrible. Like,
I mean, that's not an insult to Nick. It's just, as I said, whatever you have. You know, I remember dating myself. I remember Willie Burton scored 50 points for the Sixers one night. I mean, it happens where somebody just gets in a zone and boom, they explode. And that's what happened to Nick Foles yesterday in the best circumstance. Well, second best circumstance. I guess the best would be the actual Super Bowl. But to play at that level against that defense, there are no words. Yeah. It was awe-inspiring.
We'll have plenty more on the matchup and everything throughout the week. And, of course, next week, John will be in Minnesota with the Super Bowl, so we'll have plenty from there. Lot to dive into, of course. John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.